Hi everyone, welcome to a new video. Thanks for joining me today. So today we are going to be drawing a blackberry in graphite, and in the meantime I will tell you my top 3 tips for realistic drawing. I think this blackberry is a really good study to do because it will show these 3 tips very well. So before we start, first I'm going to explain about my materials. So I'm using 8x11 Canson 1557 paper, 180 grams. And the pencils I'm using are the Faber-Castell Pit Graphite Matte pencils, and these are new. So I've done 2 live streams in which I tested these out, so you can still watch those here on the channel. And today I'm going to do the first super realistic study with them on my Canson paper. So it turned out to be really nice because these pencils, they don't cause a glare on the paper. So usually when you work with graphite, they start to glare if you add a lot of pressure on the paper, and it doesn't get picked up by the camera very well. So that's why it's sometimes a little bit hard to do graphite tutorials or graphite studies on camera, because your drawing always looks lighter than it actually is. But these ones get picked up really well, so you can finally actually see what I'm doing. So that's really nice. So let's get started right away with the drawing and the first tip. So the very first tip for creating good realistic drawings, that is proportions. So first you start out with a sketch, and you have to make sure that the proportions are correct. You don't always have to create an exact copy of the photo. Of course, when you're drawing a human or someone's dog, you have to make sure that the proportions are correct, because if something is off, you will see it right away. But now when drawing a blackberry, for instance, or something else like a fruit or a leaf, it doesn't really matter how exact the subject looks compared to the photo, but you have to make sure it looks believable. So in this case, I am making sure to sketch out every little segment of the blackberry to make it as exact to the photo as possible. Of course, every fruit is different, so that's why it doesn't really matter when you're drawing fruit, but it's a really good subject to practice your freehanding skills on. So first I started out with the basic shape of the blackberry, sketching out the top and bottom lines and then the guidelines, and then I sketched out all these little segments. Tracing is also a really good way to get the proportions right. I do like to trace sometimes, but I also like combining the two. So I trace some subjects and then I freehand again, and then I trace again, and then I freehand again, and that really helps training your brain. So I don't have anything against tracing. It can actually help you, especially if you are a beginner, to help you see and observe. But it is good to keep practicing your freehanding skills as much as possible. Okay, so when everything was lined out really well and I was happy with the proportions, it is time for the shading. So tip 2 will be shading or contrast. Contrast is super important. So contrast is the difference between the lightest lights in the drawing and the darkest darks. So of course every subject has different contrasts. This blackberry has very high contrast. As you can see, there are some super extremely dark parts in the blackberry, but also some really light dots on each of these segments, and that's the highlight. So it's the area where the sunlight hits and that area gets lit up, and then the areas that are super dark are the parts where not much light is hitting. So if you want to create a realistic a subject or a realistic drawing, you have to make sure that the contrast is correct. So I'm looking super well at the reference photo, and first I'm mapping out all these dark shapes in the drawing. So I make sure to have those in first, because then judging the rest of the values is a lot easier. So you can see that I first mapped out all the dark shadows in between the little bumps or segments. I'm not sure what you call them, so I'm calling them bumps. So I'm filling these in first, separating them really well. And then when I did that, I started adding the shadow on each individual segment. So for this you have to learn how to see your subject as an abstract shape. And that is tip 3. So learn to see abstract shapes. Instead of looking at an eye, for instance, like an eye, and just see it as an eye, you have to really zoom in and see all the different shapes inside the eye and all the differences between light and dark. To help you do this, you could put your drawing upside down and also put the reference photo upside down, because then your brain can't see the subject that well anymore, and you automatically see the shapes more as abstracts. And this blackberry is a super good way to study that and to learn to see abstract shapes, because you see them pretty well in the blackberry. Each of these segments has this shape on it, this dark shape, and I fill these in first while leaving the highlights open. So you can see I filled all these dark shapes in around the highlights, so you can see some light little shapes, some dark shapes. Right now it still looks a little bit weird because the values aren't completely correct yet. There's still a lot of contrast in the drawing. And then when all the basic shapes are in place, so all the lights and all the darks, you can start bringing the values together more. So darken up the areas that are still a little bit too light. So that's what I'm doing now, just adding light layers with the pencil to darken up the whole blackberry while I still keep the brightest highlights very white. And then it's a matter of building up the layers until you're happy with what it looks like. But that foundation really has to be strong, so you know how to progress. You can see slowly by adding more layers that the drawing is getting more body. So again, my 3 biggest tips for realistic drawing are proportions. Make sure your sketch is correct. By doing it one way or the other, you can decide for yourself how you want to set up the sketch. And then 2 is contrast. So make sure that the darks are dark enough and the lights are light enough. That's something that Lisa from Luxury Fine Art says all the time. And then 3 is abstract shapes. And that can also help you with deciding where to place your darkest darks and lightest lights. So learn to see your objects or your subject as an abstract shape instead of letting your brain decide what it is, because everyone knows what a horse looks like, but if you've never practiced a horse, you will probably draw something completely different or something that is not accurate. So you have to force your brain to see the shapes as they are, and you can do that or teach that by placing your drawing and the reference upside down. Alright, so that is it for this video. I hope you found it interesting. I hope you liked how the drawing turned out. Let me know what you think of it. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. Of course, you can find the full tutorial over on Patreon and on my new membership site when it's launched. I will give you some more information about that soon because I'm launching it soon. But for now, I hope you liked it and I will see you in the next video.